Be sure to subscribe and like our channel. Welcome, this is Deeper Down the Rabbit Hole, and in fact, Queen City Curio and Apothecary Videocast. If you are in the Toronto area, you know which occult store you should be visiting, or spiritual store, or you name your kind of theosophical bent of brand store. It's us, 607 Gerard Street. Not only that, we have a fully functional acupuncture clinic.
That we do.
So if your body needs some work, we got community, we got regular acupuncture, we got qigong, we got herbs. This is the place for you. So,
looks great.
You need your body. Thank you, Jason. That's in fact our guest, Jason Reed, today, who's written several books on Daoist Magick, which is a topic near to Zach's heart, particularly very, very near to Zach's heart.
Yep.
So we're happy to have him today, and I have one of his books. Zach has a second, so Zach, put it up on the screen. There we go.
There we go.
In stereo. Of course, the links for these books will be in the show notes. So we're glad to have you today. We had a great conversation ahead of time for people who are kind of just coming on. Our normal time for the show is obviously usually at 6 o'clock. But in the UK, that's like, 3 a.m. So when we have UK guests on, we're going to come on and have it a little earlier. So I hope everyone kind of, as you get used to us, we'll kind of put it out there when the live show is. Of course, we want to try to keep doing live shows because of the fact that there's just a different dynamic. Authors have a tendency to truth bomb on live shows that they don't do in pre-recorded shows. It's just more real and authentic than a non-live show. And that's why we do it. That's why, Jason, you agree? See, that's why we did it. That's why we did it in actual radio for Deeper Down. That's why eventually, once we start getting more sponsors for our show, we're going to be on a live radio, physical radio, at a live time. Same thing. So I think it's kind of to start the conversation. I think a lot of people have a lot of wrong notions about Daoist magic, being monolithic, or there only being one type of Daoist magic. But even in the discussion we had earlier today, there's not one branch of Daoist magic. So maybe you could tell us some of the branches of Daoist magic and how they differ and where you're coming from.
Okay. That's a great question, but it's also one that requires a quite extensive answer. So what you're looking at is, at a very basic level, you're looking at orthodox Taoism, which would be like your Zhengyi, Quanzhen, Wudang, I guess. These are your orthodox schools. They're the ones that everyone knows. Their focus isn't what we call Fulu, like a magical tradition. Even though they have elements of that, it's not really their focus. So you have other Taoist schools which either focus on being a good person, gathering merit, which is they consider you a bit like Christianity to be a sinner, and you have to pray to the gods and become a better person. And then you have the alchemical tradition, which you're probably very familiar with, which is about self-development and all the rest of it. Then you have this magical tradition, what we're getting to now, which in my opinion was actually one of the first forms of Taoism under a guy called Zhang Yaolin, who pretty much founded magical Taoism as you know it now in Sichuan province. And so this guy was he basically created his own kingdom, his own community in Sichuan province, and everyone lived a magical life. They would be sort of like using talismans, as we know, alchemy, breath control to create certain functions and to get rid of diseases and sickness, which is always the focus of the magical tradition. Above all things, is a healing tradition. But whether we look at this healing tradition in the same way as a Western, no, of course not. Some of the sicknesses are due to like our energetic body, the chi, and the way they would explain it to you is like sort of spirits and things like this too. But it's not something I go into now because it sounds a bit crazy right at the moment. But so you've got these. So to answer your question, yeah, Daoist magic has various forms, which range from high magic, which would be like self-development and cultivation, achieving immortality. Okay, we all know the Neigong or Qigong, whatever you want to call it. They're the same thing, really, more or less. More or less. And then you have that magical tradition too, which is you have magical additions to those techniques, those alchemical techniques in tandem. For example, we might use Qigong and Neigong, but we do other things like as well. So we would use talismans, yeah, like burn them and consecrate them, burn them, drink them, this kind of thing. Herbs, well, what you'd call weight down, I guess. Where you guys are experts and you know all about this. And acupuncture too. There's not just an acupuncture for healing, there's an acupuncture for spiritual development too. So there's lots of aspects to the magical Taoism which deal with many things. So you have your healing, self-development magic, I guess. And then I guess what Maoshan is famous for is exorcistic magic, where it gets towards that shamanistic side of going to other worlds and underworld or xianjie, which is like the abode of the immortals. So that's in a nutshell.
So you practice a type of specialized folk Taoism, and you were very fortunate because you kind of married into an actual lineage.
Yeah.
And maybe you could talk about that. Well, what you can say about that.
Okay, right. So it's best to tell my story first, but without sounding like I'm on the lunatic fringe. These things.
We're
things,
deeper down the rabbit hole.
We're deeper down. You're not going to sound
like people have been around us and weird stuff happens. It's okay, Jason. You can let
all
loose.
right.
Okay, maybe it happened for you guys as well, but this I don't want to call it a calling. In the Gnostic tradition they would call it a calling. But since I was a kid, I've been really interested in sort of spirituality, and I had a number of experiences when I was a child, like most children do, actually, and they kind of led me up along a path. And I started off with, I suppose, what you'd call Western magic or the Hermetic tradition, the Kabbalah. And for me, I didn't quite find the satisfaction that I wanted in that tradition, because a lot of it, people are going to kill me for this, is quite contrived. It's like just. You can
send a hate mail to Jason Reed at gmail.com on that one.
Yeah, I don't mean it in that way. It still works, for some people, and it's an excellent system. I did it myself for years, so there's no hate intended. But for me, it was just not my cup of tea. But at the same time, I was also really into martial arts since I was a kid, and I started off studying with a Malaysian teacher, Tay Sulun, who would like drop these hints about sort of like a more deeper side of things. But it was not something he taught himself, though. And so I had this two parallel interests, which was martial arts and magic. But they never seemed to cross at any point at first, because I wasn't really aware there was a Chinese magical tradition. Like most people, I thought Taoism was just sitting on a mountain somewhere, doing Tai Chi in a nice blue suit.
Although that said, I would like to do Tai Chi in a nice blue suit on a mountain.
Yeah, me too.
I would too.
Actually, pretty good vacation, actually.
Well, what I mean is the impression that people get, that's Taoism. I didn't think there was a magical tradition to it, and but the paths crossed for me when I began to read more and more, about going deeper into Taoism, and I found out there was this actual secret tradition. Yeah, it's not that secret actually, right? There's a secret tradition of actual magic, yeah, not just cultivation or Tai Chi, and the things that everyone is familiar with in Taoism, I Ching, that sort of thing. So I joined the Royal Navy after university, where I was an officer in intelligence, and so I got to travel the world, and they paid my degree as well. One of my stops was Singapore, and then I thought, that's when I started visiting the temples and everything, I think, and I could really feel something there. I'd practice in the West in magical traditions, and I'd be into lodges, as they call them, but this was a completely different feeling. I could almost feel the electricity in the air. And I thought, wow, what is this? No one told me about this. But unfortunately, I was still in the military. I couldn't really do anything about it unless I kind of ran away, then got a nice pair of handcuffs on the way back. So then I started looking for literature on Chinese magic. Was there anything? No, not really.
We are aware.
We are aware.
And that's when I made my decision that when I left the military, because I have a certain term of service, like 4 to 10 years, depending on which contract I signed. I was going to go to Asia and kind of look for these things. So when I left the military, I went to Singapore. And Singapore is not too bad, actually, because most things it's a bilingual culture, so they speak a lot of English and a lot of Chinese too, and some Hakka on the sly, right? So, and that's when I met my first teacher. Okay. But that was expensive. Another thing that you'll learn about Asia is that you don't get freebies. Yeah. Like in the West, people take knowledge for granted and you just take it. You say, oh, yeah, download a free PDF or something. And,
We are also aware.
Yes, we are.
Very much so. That's a very different thing we struggle with. Zach, who actually had pilgrimages, has family teachers and stuff like that. People expect him to give it away for free, and he won't, and they get mad at him.
Yeah, sure.
Really, really angry with him. So we understand,
Yeah. So I think it's fair exchange of energy. So I paid my money, and I learned the first rudiments of an actual Daoist system. And it was explained to me in English and Chinese, which was a head start. I was still learning Chinese at the time. So I managed to build up quite a good vocabulary of Daoist, specifically, not just Daoist Chinese, but Daoist magical Chinese, So I was understanding what Shen Tan means, or, Bei Dao, and all this sort of thing. And Bu Gang, all these things that everyone learns. The very basics, how to write a Shu Wen. It's kind of like a letter to the gods, which you kind of write out, and that sort of thing. You burn it in a biao, which is like a paper tube, which you insert it in. So I learned all my basics like this, as well as receiving my first transmission of Chuan from my teacher. But he was quite limited in what he knew. So I wanted to go and find the roots of it. And so that's when I went to China. And that was much more difficult because of the censorship in China. Now, a lot of people will argue with me, there's no censorship in China, but there is. Okay.
I don't think anyone's going to argue with that anymore.
Yeah. Well, when I published my book, and I Practical Chinese Magic, I don't know if you've read this one yet. I made some comments about China, and I received a bit of a backlash about it. But I was there, I saw it for myself, including the laws which ban occultism in China, and the fact that I spent 2 days in jail there, for practicing illegal occultism with my teacher at the time. And it's only because I paid money we got out of the jail. So it's definitely, a thing. So I went to China, and obviously these people aren't advertising, so they'll get in trouble. But there is an occult underground, which you find by social media, like Weixin, Weibo, this kind of thing. Often like they're booksellers and things like that. So I was looking online for these different people, and people saying, "Oh yeah, you want to go and see this guy?" Then this guy would turn out to be a complete fake. It's like, some guy in his apartment. He'd read, a couple of books from Taiwan or something, and you could tell straight away. So I went through a few fake teachers in China because people we get social security and free healthcare in the UK and all that, but you don't get that in China. So I bear them no ill will. But then, I thought, I'm going to give up on this. But, that's when I met my now wife, Vicky Wen, or Vicky Ven, maybe you want to use the Malaysian version of her name, because she's Malaysian origin, even though she lives in China. There's a link between the two. And she is the cousin of the Liang family, who had their own Maoshan system. That's just by sheer coincidence, if you believe in coincidence, that's how I met Dr. Liang. And he felt that magical Taoism in China was going to die out. There's this bulldozing of small temples and shrines in favor of like the larger touristy places like Wudang and other places I won't mention. So he accepted me into the family. I received a transmission, and I've been learning ever since then. It's a kind of folk Taoism. I should make this point. A lot of people confuse the two. They say, well, you're not a Wudang high priest or a Quanzhen high priest. And no, I'm not. It's a completely different thing.
That's because you're not, like you literally said, you're from a village priest.
But a lot of people contact me by email and everything, expecting me to teach them to be a Daoist in inverted commas. And it's just not the case. And they get upset at some of the things I do because they would consider it, quite frankly, witchcraft.
So I know you're using the term Maoshan pretty specifically to your tradition. However, I know there's at least 3 other traditions publicly that use that term. So Could you go into it? Because usually when people start going into
Maoshan, this is the other thing that messes people up when they try to contact me. Okay. First thing, I suppose the original Maoshan is called the Shanqing. Mm-hmm. Okay. They are actually an orthodox sect, even though quite different from the others, actually. In fact, it's about lone practice rather than group practice, like in other temples. Okay. So you had this Shanqing Maoshan founded by the three Mao brothers. And that's way back. And you had guys like Tao Hongling, who kind of like expanded on that. And really, they're an extension of Ling Bao, which that ultimately, the Book of Five Talismans and that sort of thing. And they're an entirely orthodox sect, even though they came to influence things. Now, it's difficult to explain, okay, how Maoshan became associated with these other folk sects. This is where folklore comes in, so it's not, so don't take this literally. But they say that there was some kind of closure or disaster in the original Shanqing, and it kind of spread, some disciples, you've heard this with Shaolin, for example, the same similar process. And some guys went out and were teaching the common people and blending it with local traditions and things like this. Okay, so that's the first Maoshan. The second Maoshan are the folk Maoshans, but even then you need to be careful, okay, because there was a society, for example, called the White Lotus Society, like a Bailian. They were into some political stuff as well as sort of worship and magic, all the bulletproofing stuff, so they could fight the Manchurians, foreigners, and that sort of thing. And they were made illegal at some point, so they changed the name Bao Lian to other names, and one of them was Maoshan. Yeah, which seemed more acceptable to the people at the time. Okay, then there's a second school, okay, which sometimes calls itself Maoshan, but it's really something called Loren, which is it's very complicated to understand. But Loren is a kind of another tradition, which is very similar in some ways. It has some similar ideas like Wu Lei, Five Thunders, and, the importance of the bowl, the water bowl. So this kind of thing on the altar, and a Shenwei, which is like a special board, red board. It has like different immortals' names on it and everything. This is a central focus, and this generally comes from the Hakka people in like Fujian and that sort of way. Now the third kind of Maoshan, is that right? Four now.
Right. Yeah, you're at the fourth one now. Yeah.
Right, the fourth Maoshan is what I would call more like folk witchcraft, which has very strong shamanistic ideas with a bit of Taoism in it. But I don't mean it like that. It's a very strong Taoism. And it has its own alchemy and everything. And it has a lot of confluence of ideas into it. Okay.
I think me and Zach have often referred to that as the I just call it the pre-imperial event, but he refers to it as what do you refer to it as, like primal Taoism, or he just
primordial, primal.
Proto-Taoism, maybe, I don't know. I'm sure there's some scholar out there who's written like something you could read on JSTOR or something. So these early shamanistic ideas, which informed another kind of thing, and maybe the Taoism came later, or maybe it grew up alongside it, but a lot of modern Orthodox Taoists wouldn't like to admit it because they want to compete with the Buddhists, which was another thing that happened. Buddhism came into China, it was direct competition, and say, oh, you're doing this like weird, Wu Gui stuff, like five ghost stuff, and that's not spiritual, so. And I personally think Orthodox Taoism grew out of that, competition with Buddhism. You look at Quan Jen, I mean, it's 50-50 really. It's like, it's not what I would, the idea of a monastery and sitting there, hitting wood blocks, chanting sutras, that's Buddhist, that's not Taoism as it was originally intended.
Oh, all right. You can send the hate mail to jasonreed@gmail.com.
Yeah, you can.
Although I think in this case we actually this is actually where it really leads into a more general topic that me and Zach often talk about, this pre and post I call it imperial because that's the way I view it. It's like an imperialization of Taoism, which
Sure.
when I've studied Shintoism, I see the same thing, and I see
Yeah,
the same
sure.
thing in Christianity and Voodoo, right? Where it's this
Absolutely.
imperialization of politicization of the original, what looked like a primordial magic, and then it became in competition with a religion that forced it into, well, a church, like,
Yes,
or a,
to make it less scary, and you know, and
yeah, exactly, to
less
take the teeth out
complicated
of
for
the system.
itself. You know.
That's a great insight because that's what it is. It's to make it less scary, to make it less, make the system have less teeth and
Yeah,
more.
it becomes less about you and more about, you know, the community. You know,
Well, right, and it gets into when we start looking at that Zhong Daoling standard, like the running joke we have here. It's the bureaucratization of Taoism, but you're like, this is basically just Confucianism put with Taoist deities, and you're going to different departments now.
yeah, sure.
So there's a lot of paperwork, whereas before it was a direct conduit where you were communicating with the spirits and not being like, "Here's my paperwork, please send it to the next officer," right?
You're right. Yeah, I mean, yeah, communication with the spirits is the heart of Taoism, whether people like it or not. Even the original alchemy is communicating with spirits inside of yourself. You know, heart spirit, lung spirits, kidney spirits, you know, all this sort of thing. Like if you read for example, the Yellow Court Classic, yeah, it's about communicating with your own body and realizing it as a cosmos in of itself. So you're literally talking to your heart, you know, and talking to your liver and your kidneys and drawing in energies and this kind of thing. And oh my God, it also corresponds with the universe we live in a way, holographic patterns again, you know. So
I think that's so interesting. I mean, like, all of my Taoist studies go on this route, which we already covered how hard it is to find anything on this particular aspect. And the notion that these things are all inside of you are spirits, and that you can actually take external spirits and mask them into organs and stuff like that, and do all that is kind of, with orthodox Taoism, it somehow got lost, right? That's what you're discussing. It's not there, or it's
the
not
whole
talked
thing,
about, or it's.
yeah, I think part of the problem was there, you know, was there's a two-tiered step down that happened in China. The first one was Sun Yat-sen, who decided that, you know, they needed a more modern scientific China, and this is where the idea of the sort of like, you know, the barefoot doctor now was wearing the white coat and was throwing out some of the babies with the bathwater, and it worsened in 1970s and 1980s. You know, when oh no, sorry, it didn't. It the second step down was Mao Zedong, obviously, Cultural Revolution. It's such a cliche, right? And a lot was lost then. People were killed. People fled, you know, to Taiwan, Hong Kong, places like that. And so medicine was turned into, rather than a spiritual tradition, they tried to give it a kind of pseudo-scientific basis, right? And I don't mean it doesn't work. I believe it works. I know it works. Okay, but they try to force explanations onto which don't really fit, you know. So,
Zach, would you, as an acupuncturist, like to say anything right now? Because I think you
The
have
thing I say
lots to say about this.
every day on the communization of traditional or Chinese medicine from a spiritual tradition. Yes, I go lectures and hours on this every week.
Yeah, sure. And it's a passionate belief in me too, you know, because there's a lot of medicine in there's a lot of medicine in the folk culture which is just not represented in, like, if I went to Beijing to learn medicine, like, one of my students is a German girl, and she's a doctor of Chinese medicine, learned in the Beijing Institute, and you know, she's reading our manuscripts and going, oh my God, right? Oh, of course, this kind of thing. Why didn't we learn that, So it's just what happened, and it's understandable to a certain extent. So I don't condemn them for it, but to make Chinese medicine or qigong, which is another modern term, acceptable to the general public, they had to give it a kind of scientific basis, don the white coats and present it in a different way. They repackaged it basically,
and I should say for what we're saying, just so the audience knows, I'm not saying that doesn't work. I might, and Zach might, and I think Jason might. He seems to be on the same page as Zach and me. Is that while what we have now, the scientific version of it, does work, it doesn't work as well as some of the original.
No, it really does
materials where the spirituality and the
my argument,
process is united.
I totally agree. I think most of the techniques they retain are good techniques, but it's the explanation that I disagree with. It's not the technique, but trying to rationalize spiritual energies which is what acupuncture deals with, imbalances of the elemental systems, excesses and deficiencies, kind of put in this bioenergetic way. But they try to put it down to the nervous system and things like this, which I just don't think is correct.
Yeah, I mean, I was even talking to students about this yesterday, where I was saying, like, which version of Chinese medicine you want. They're both on the playing field right now. However, if you're looking at healing and we're assuming there's energy, you have to assume there's life changes in the process of the healing. If you think I'm just sticking a needle and your shoulder is fixed, but it's an emotional issue, unless I'm working on that emotional issue, that's probably not going to help you that much. Right? So this is where you have all those layers of healing.
Yeah, right.
Well, you know what? Even in Canada, I think, Zach, you're like on an edge case of this, because clearly the National Board of Acupuncturists here doesn't care about that sort of stuff. Like, they don't. That's not on your test. None of it's on the test for your examination. So, like, there's a lot of acupuncturists that may not even know anything about, as we were saying, the spirits of the organs or the balance of the elements inside of each organ or any of that, because it doesn't fit. Again, so, well, Zach, you being sort of having the sort of Taoist sort of family lineage that kind of gets passed down, you have a different insight that's more similar to Jason's than what is sort of the national test, because it's very similar to what is going on in Beijing, right? Like, here's your scientific, I don't want to call it scientific because it's more like scientism than scientific. Like a real scientist might, I don't want to say real scientist either, but someone employing the scientific method might come to the conclusion that there might be more than the scientism explanation, and they have to look further and try to rule out all the possibilities until they come to, well, maybe something like qi has to exist because there's no other explanation. I'm not saying they will come to that conclusion, but they might via the process of elimination of everything like that. So being a scientist, I kind of always do this sort of scientism versus scientist thing. But I think Zach, specifically, you're outside the kind of normal curve on this.
Absolutely.
You're kind of, like you have a much closer experience to Jason's than I think the average acupuncturist or average Chinese medicine healer.
Yeah, let's give you some examples. There's ideas of like something called qie, which is like a kind of evil energy in the environment, and this kind of thing. Which you go to an acupuncturist and say, well, I think I have this like yin shui, right, sort of like affecting my life and bringing me down. You're not going to get, they're probably going to treat it for depression or something, something rationalized.
Well, right, and even on that juncture between Daoist magics and, say, Chinese medicine, you even bring up the point within the Thunder Magic book that you're saying, here's this thunder pouch you could have with these herbs. And I looked at those herbs, I'm like, these are blood moving herbs, but
Yeah.
there's much more weight to them because even in the pre-piece chapter, you're talking about, like, well, you're doing an invocation of the thunder spirit. And then you're talking about Neigong techniques there, or the Qigong techniques working with that too. So there's a lot of steps that are intercrossing here, even from a medicinal standard.
Yeah, it's a three-tiered process, isn't it? You have a physical something to hold the power, if you like, and you have the qigong work. It can't just be done by anyone. You have to have the transmission chuan. Okay, which is not so. I'm going to discuss this later. And then there's also the idea of words, the power of word, intention as well. Yi, which is really important in spells and things like that. Let's call it what it is. It's a spell. Okay. It's a way of molding energies. Okay, but it's not just me, that's doing it. Yeah, this is my sincere belief. When I first started, I thought, oh yeah, it's all in my mind, and I had this Western idea of what's the word I'm looking for? That it's like a kind of weaponized psychology, if you like. That I believe this works, so it's working. But then I had certain experiences which I prefer not to discuss at this point, because
now I want to ask
because these rumors start. But when you dealing with an actual Maoshan master, you see stuff. Okay.
Trust me. We have on the show said things that probably would make us seem like insane, except we have 5 witnesses.
Sure.
Or 6, Zach, right? Like, so we understand why you wouldn't want to talk about that, but we're well aware that when you start working with your own magic, the psychological model works about the 99% of the time, and that 1% scares the crap out of you.
Sure.
That it doesn't work. So.
Yeah. So yeah. I mean, I don't know when this separation of magic and medicine happened. It has, more or less. But if a healer had this magical model and the Chinese medical knowledge and brought them together, what a healer he would be. And that
I think. Yeah. I mean, going into that separation a little bit more. Again, like that goes back to what I was saying. That Zach tries to combine the two, and I said he's an outlier. And like I said, most of the acupuncturists aren't trained that way.
Sure.
But to switch gears a little, so we could sell some of your books, right? Let's talk about the Fox Magic a little, because
okay, right.
How do we go from Taoism? Now how do we go to Taoism to a Fox Magic book?
Okay.
How do they connect?
Right. There's a couple of reasons why I chose the Fox Magic. Okay. First, it's a tradition of outsiders. I don't know if you read a book by Colin Wilson years ago. He wrote a book called The Outsiders, which is about things on the edge, on the liminal. Also, there's a lot about the fox spirit in popular culture. So this was a good way to get into, if you like, sneak in some Taoist knowledge into people's lives without them realizing it. It's kind of like anime, but so and also it's an important part of Chinese culture, always has been. The fox spirit, Huli Jing, which has a really long tradition. And from my investigations and from speaking with my teacher, because the fox tradition is part of that, it seems to come from India, from the idea of, probably through Tibet and Buddhism, of the idea of the, God, it's left me now, the Tibetan goddesses who were teaching, dakinis, that's it, sorry, long day. So the dakinis were like female feminine energy, which kind of like males or females interacted with to cause transformations in consciousness and even physically sometimes. You're more familiar with it from tantric yoga, for example. Yeah, and I don't mean Sting's version of tantric yoga, but real yoga. Yeah. Right. So part of that kind of merged with what I say is a culture that was pre-existing animism in China. You have this idea of the dakini, which is like a tutelary spirit, and you have this idea of this animistic fox thing, which is particularly well developed in the north of China with the Ba-Mei people, for example, who have a Shen Gong tradition, a shamanistic tradition with the drums and everything, of being possessed by spirits. It's exactly like Wudong, really, or the modern Tanki movement, pretty similar to that. But the fox cultist has always been the outsider. It was outside the imperialist field. She was a woman outside. She was beautiful outside. She didn't like to be dominated by males outside. These are like in Chinese culture, the female was always meant to be, like submissive, Confucian, bow on the head, but not the fox spirit. So there's a lot of feeding into this, but basically, the fox spirit was a way that the common people could approach the gods, without being some kind of like Shanqing elite, and have that come into their lives and cause personal transformations. Okay, so that's where that book is coming from. So I felt this is a good one. Yeah, so I felt this one's a good one to give to people, because this idea of the fox spirit being on the outside is not something that requires sort of like where it's a folk tradition. It's not something that requires a guru, if you like, something you can explore by yourself. But it has dangers, like anything good. Yeah, you're dealing with two themes here. The two most powerful kinds of transformation, as I noted in the book, are eros and thanatos, sex and death. These are very powerful transformers of people, and the Fox edition covers those two things, because sex and death are like two polarities. Even in our alchemy, sex and death, we have they're very connected with jinn and all these kind of ideas. And so there's a lot to unpack there. There's also not a lot revealed in the book, which people can discover for themselves. And then I explored how that fox cult, I use cult, not in the same sense as, and how it spread across Asia, that way towards Japan being the most famous manifestation. You might have seen the stone break recently, actually, and all that. Right, so,
right, with this, the several thousand-year-old demon spirit in the stone that broke recently.
Yeah, nothing's happened.
As the world events start to shift into total chaos. No coincidence there, whatever. Maybe not. Maybe.
World on fire, COVID, war in Croatia, China, saber rat.
Yeah. Nothing happened right around the time that rock broke. Nothing. No correlation there. Nothing happened. So in a way of fox spirits, I mean, in a way, it's a method that you kind of put the fox spirit in a messenger role, that it can, in some ways, reach around or sideways to some of the orthodox bureaucracy that you would otherwise need, because that's what foxes do. Like, in a way, it's sort of a messenger spirit that kind of allows the common person who might be a Taoist to get access to parts of Taoist immortals they otherwise couldn't get. And that comes with, as you were saying, risks and benefits. You didn't
Yeah.
some of the benefits seem obvious. You get access to Taoist immortals that could better your life and possibly help you.
Sure.
But what are the risks? Because it's kind of like you mentioned it, but what could they be for people?
Well, the risks can be obsession is the main risk. Yeah. I found, having worked within the Fox tradition, you know, particularly men, they get obsessed, you know, with the image of the fox, and it leads to this kind of I'll tell you a story about how it happened to me. But it was also a lesson. But you know, I did the fox thing, you know, at first, and then one day I had this experience. Like, I woke up in the middle of the night, and I suppose most people would just say, "Oh, yes, oh, it's just sleep paralysis," but it wasn't. You know, I was wide awake, and I looked at the corner of my eye, and there was a fox face just there. And you know how you accept these things without, you know. And I felt like sucking something out of my body, like, oh, like this, and I thought, what have I done wrong here? You know, so that's the sort of thing that can happen to you if you're not careful. You know, you can get the wrong kind of spirit, which becomes which feeds on you, basically, especially for men. You know, becomes like a parasite. And I fed it with my obsessions at the time, you know, with the wrong intention, the wrong feelings, and so that.
So did the fox,
yeah.
did
So
the
that's
fox spirit bring that, or I mean, did the fox spirit bring that, or did the fox spirit just respond to what your intentions were? Like,
I think it was
exactly what you said.
I think it responded to intentions, but that's not always the case. There are actual spirits that are really dangerous. Yeah. And I know in this 21st century, it sounds nuts, but there's some weird stuff out there that wants to hurt you, right?
Nature, this does not scare anyone, and I think that is probably our listeners. Nature, the wolf eats the sheep, so we should assume that things that may want to eat us is not necessarily evil, but it just is.
Sure. It's an energetic process.
Point of view. Right.
So, as you might be aware, some spirits can grow themselves by feeding on human beings' energy, which is quite a high level on this planet. Yang energy, as you would call it, you know. So I don't want to go too much onto these topics, but I mean, we have these ideas, you know, like vampirism or succubi in the West as well. So it's, in every culture, you know, you have these traditions.
But it's kind of interesting because the important thing isn't the dangers. Like, you learn some basic self-defense and techniques to kind of mitigate that. The important thing is sort of the neutrality that the fox seems to have here that you're describing. It's sort of like, well, what's your real intention? If your real intention is obsession, I'll help you with that.
Yeah,
and that's your real intention is.
That's a lesson.
Your real intention, yeah.
That was a lesson I was told, and I didn't learn when I first started tradition. I made loads of mistakes, you know, in my path. You know, that's how you learn. Yeah. So yeah, I didn't know how to defend myself. I took the wrong approach to it, you know, and I was burned.
Well, that's okay. I mean, because we're like, we all get burned, but it's also saying something about the fox. Like, foxes are known to be about glamours, but the thing is that if you buy too much into any glamour, you can't learn anything because you get distracted by the glamour. Like, and if the fox is like a neutral, I will go get you what you want, and you get distracted by the glamour, what you want has now been really confused. Like,
sure. And we are good friends. We have a good relationship. So it's something I overcame. But I get I guess you do need that caution. You know, really, she gives you what you want subconsciously. You know, so you have to be careful.
Sounds very much like classic trickster spirits. Like,
oh, absolutely, yes, she absolutely is. But a particularly dangerous one if you believe Chinese folklore. Some of these creatures have been cultivating for thousands of years. You know, vast experience and knowledge.
So, you got a question there, Andrieh? Or
no, go ahead, Zach.
so it was interesting, particularly in the fox book, that you broke down the different types of foxes. That I have not seen really in English translations. So if you can give a little bit of that.
Sorry.
If you can give it a little bit of the descriptions, because they are referencing within the 5 elemental spectrums.
Oh, sure. Yeah, right. Okay. You mean in the standard ritual? Yeah.
Correct.
Okay. Yeah. So in the standard ritual, you tend to find this with most Chinese systems. You know, there's a elemental classification of everything. Yeah, because it's such a vital part of the way things manifest on the earth. You know, you can start way back from the Hertu diagram, Loshu, and all that. Things on that by law, it's a physical fact, you know, and an energetic fact that all things manifest through the 5 elements. Yeah, whether it's the fox spirits or heavenly generals, you probably know 5 battalions, that sort of thing. So it happens for the fox as well, but then you can work with each one, like they're all particularly good at things, you know, like some, you know, for example, you know, you need growth in your life, you go for the green fox, and you know, you want passion and fire in your life. But it goes beyond that as well. There are other kinds of foxes, you know, like such as peach flower, you know, like hua, you know, you'd understand being Chinese, like Daohua, you know, it's you know, you're looking for love in your life, not manipulative, you know, like trying to make a grab for someone. And there's black fox, which is about money, which seems like a strange color to have for money, but black's color of water, as you know, and the north, and water is a symbol of wealth in Chinese culture, the flow of wealth. Wealth should flow, you know, which is an important lesson, which we're not learning in the West, because wealth tends to get stuck up at the top and none of it trickles down to everyone. Yeah, and so that's not wealth; that's stagnant. So, so that's the idea behind the foxes, you know. And it's a classification you might see in a lot of systems, not just the foxes. You know, there's 5 emperors, and so on. The Wudi, you have dragons as well. Yeah, when you do further work. So it gives you an access to work if you like a kind of yoga. You know, I use that in inverted commas. Okay, it gives you a kind of yoga to experience, having an experiential level of those forces, not just as a subjective thing. Yeah, but as a, you know.
So we've been talking for, yeah. So we've been talking for almost an hour, Jason. It's almost been an hour. So, what do you have coming up? Like, you got the Fox book done. What's your next project coming up?
Okay, I'm writing in a book right now, actually, called I'm doing a translation of a book called the Lu Ban. You might know it. Yeah. Lu Ban was it's a hard figure to pin down, but if you imagine like a Chinese Daedalus, yeah, you know, the Greek architect who did amazing stuff. Now, Lu Ban is a patron of carpentry, temple building, feng shui, all this kind of thing. But there was these series of books written, which are like feng shui books, not the rubbish feng shui, which a lot of people do nowadays. You know, like, oh God, my marriage is dead, so if I just crack the bed to the northeast, everything's great, right? Not that kind of feng shui. This kind of feng shui is like about the sizes and dimensions of things, where they're placed according to the heavenly stems and all that sort of, and earthly branches and all that kind of thing. It's about the physical placement and dimensions of things. But there was meant to be this other part of the Luban, which was meant to be lost, or but it's not. This Luban was a book of magic. Okay. It has a really, in the same way that you heard of the Key of Solomon, the way the Key of Solomon has a reputation in the West, I guess the Luban, there's a few names for it. I've compounded 3 translations of 3 different scripts into my new book. Where the Luban is kind of like the Chinese version of this. You know, it has all the key ideas of magic. Now, if you go to different groups, like which I have, Maoshan, Liu Ren, and all these guys, okay, you can see like spells which have been taken from the Luban and found their way into their system, like I don't know, like drawing a thunder on your palm and this sort of thing, or tiger for bravery, and all this kind of thing. But there's more to it than that, you know. It's no good otherwise we'd be doing this all day, like dollars, you know. But so a lot of these key ideas in the Luban seem to have spread into different lineages and traditions in southern China, particularly. Fujian, Guangdong, and eventually up north even, but mainly in the south of China. And I think I think a Luban is a really great bird's eye view and a source book for Chinese magic in general. Okay, it has everything in there, you know, from healing spells, feng shui spells, communication with foxes. You know, you're meant to have like a fox teacher. Part of which I gave in the Fox Magic book. It has its own Lo Jia Lo Ding system, which is like a kind of it's a bit complicated to explain, but they're an entity associated with time and space, the hours and stuff. That they're responsible for some of the greatest magic in Chinese sorcery, if you like, because they're dealing with time and space. So they're the ones that are most capable of, you know. So you find a lot of the high magic is associated with this art called Lo Jia, Liu Ding, yeah, which are associated again with Zhou Tianshuan and all these other ideas, the 12 celestial maidens and all that. But the Luban is a great bird's eye view of all this kind of magic. So some of it's very prosaic, okay, everyday magic, you know. And some of it is quite high, you know, quite high level with bagua stepping, and, you know, going down into the underworld. Yeah, something called the Circle of Light, which is like a kind of clairvoyance, you know. And, so that's what I'm working on at the moment. Get that into English.
As soon as you get that one done, you got to come back
Let us
on.
know.
Yeah, right.
Because I think we'd be interested in talking about that.
Yeah, no, I think it's about time, you know, because it's about time these things got introduced to the West. The East has always injected good stuff into our culture, but we haven't had enough of it from China yet. There's such a wealth of knowledge and technique and methodology, which is lost to traditions in the West because of Christianity, pretty much destroyed it in the political system. But they preserved it in China, in lineages. You know, there was no, they didn't have the same kind of guilt and shame which would led to you being burnt at the stake, for example. So they have so much to give us, and it's about time this happened. I mean, it happened in India, yeah, where now you can go down the library and buy the Habhaja Tantra or something, Then it happened in Tibet, which you can get real Dharma teachers now. Now it needs to happen in China. Okay. The other reason why this needs to happen is it stops all the fakery. Yeah. Because people just don't know anything. People aren't informed about actually what Chinese magic is. So what you do is you get these guys, which are like out there, and they have like these fake systems which don't really exist. It's like a combination of like Western ideas all blended into a bit of I Ching and all this sort of thing. And it doesn't really represent what Chinese are doing at all, So another reason is people just need to be better informed, about Chinese traditions in general. And I mean not just about orthodox Taoism, but the whole spectrum of it. There's some great work on orthodox Taoism already, people translating the Daoist canon and stuff like that. And that's not my field or my speciality. And it's a great field, okay, because there is a certain point where they do cross. We share some of the scriptures, like the Big Dipper scripture, for example, is really important, or the Yin debt scripture, which looks at how we are born into life in debt. And Tai Shang Lao Zhang, which is like one of our main figures, teaches us how we can get out of this debt, and things like this. So we do share a lot, of ideas, and but there's other people doing that, and they're better at than I am. So I will focus on this area and give that to people. If people ask me about Taoism, I say I don't know anything. They ask me about folk Taoism, so I know something.
So do you have any upcoming events or presentations that you'd like to kind of announce, since we're in a worldwide market? Maybe people could go attend them.
Actually, we do have a small group. We're going to be starting up a Google Classroom for people that are interested in some basic ideas, which are in Maoshan, simple simple formula. They don't really need transmission for. So, for example, some simple ideas like simple cultivation ideas, which certain Qigong, I use the word sparingly, Qigong ideas that people may have not heard of because they're not in the standard Qigong exercises. Some are similar, cleansing and all this sort of thing, and gathering. Obviously, it's going to be the same, because but we have some other unique ideas, which maybe some people aren't familiar with. And we can teach you, share is a better word, share you some ideas from Maoshan. And I'll let you know when that happens, because we're still building the classroom, so to speak. So people have a tier system which they can go through. Without, probably our most important exercise that we will teach is something called some people call them the 8 great spells. These are highly important. There's a particular one that's really important called the Golden Light. And I think personally, this should be a part of the practice of everyone who does Qigong. It's one of the original exercises developed by the Ling Bao guys. Comes right back to Hong Jiaoning and those guys, the celestial masters. The Golden Light it can only, all genuine folk magical schools will have that as their primary exercise, even before Qigong. We'll be teaching that.
So if people want to get into the Google Classroom, how do they do that?
Okay, I can send you a link later.
Sure. We'll put it on.
We're not quite ready yet. I never intended to really, me and my wife were quite private people. We never intended to But then people responded so much, and I get stacks of emails daily, letters sometimes, because people were really hungry to learn something. But it does require a certain amount of transmission. But we can give a certain amount, which doesn't require transmission. Like Buddhism, there's a certain amount. It's like plugging in. Yeah, it's hard to explain exactly. Probably Zach will realize. Maybe you do as well. I don't know your spiritual history, but a lineage goes beyond time and space. It's best not to think of it in a linear way. There's this huge reservoir of ancestral experiential energy, which a lineage taps you into. Yeah. For example, if you're a true heart Maoshan guy, you have like Hu at the top, who kind of like channels this energy into you. Right? I'm not in that tradition, and I can't say the names of our teachers, but there's a similarity to the true heart Maoshan.
So for right now, we'll give everyone your email address. Let you give out the details.
I do have Twitter.
Connect.
I do have Twitter as well, where I regularly post.
So we'll post that up in the description. So.
Yeah. Okay. The only problem with Twitter is you can't really write very much.
Totally. So really, if people are interested in sort of getting involved, we'll give them your email address and the link to kind of touch base to kind of go forward. So that said, we're about an hour now.
Okay.
So we got a couple announcements before we go.
Yeah,
obviously, everyone for Queen City, all the sponsors of the show and our store, you asked for it, continuously begged for it. You demanded it for months. So next week we're starting for sponsors our hardcore tarot and Kabbalah. Well, it's mostly tarot, but it'll have Kabbalah and elemental throwdown that you asked me to teach. You asked Zach to tell me to teach. You asked other people I know.
Half a year.
You've asked other people to ask me to do it, even though I was like, nah, I don't want to do it. Until the point that Zach told me, I'm your business partner. You're going to do this, and that's the end of it. And I said,
because
okay,
I got
Zach,
endless emails on this. I got endless emails like, Andrieh, can he do the tarot? I'm like, all right. How many emails do we need for this?
So if you're interested and you're a sponsor, we have over 60 paid-for workshops that me and Zach have run. Over 60 that you get if you're a member, and you can review them all, including full, straight-up angels summonings, where we've actually used techniques to embed some of the energetic transmission in the videos and with results. So this isn't kind of like we're screwing around. Well, we are screwing around. We're having fun with it, but not in a bad way. Like, there's a lot of these things. There was, if you look back, there's
King.
Right. There was a Monkey King ritual. There's a more relevant,
There's a bunch.
somewhat relevant. Right. So there's the Queen of the West, some things ritual in our collection of actual rituals and workshops. So you all keep our lights on by being a sponsor. That's literally it. We can't bring you great shows like what Jason talked about today without keeping the lights on. So become a sponsor. Help us keep the lights on. We'll do our best to bring quality people on the video cast and give you quality workshops for sponsors. This week, if you're watching live, we don't have any plans to make anything tomorrow. However, next week, we're going to make candles. So if you're physically make candles, not just magically make candles, like the physical process of hand making the candles and not burning yourself, which is one of the key aspects of making candles.
Safety first. Safety first.
Right. Then, if people are here, maybe we'll talk a little bit of how you imbue the candles with magic as you're making them. But you got to come, and you might have to help out. If you don't help out, we'll kind of probably be silent on the questions. But if you help out, like you helped us make the candles for the store, you can ask magical questions. Little kind of energy exchange there. If you're a sponsor, you can come stay and ask all the questions. I think a few weeks ago we had someone come by when I made the Peaceful Home powder, and they learned probably more about how to make a powder, like in Conjure, and how to actually get it to work more than they could have possibly understood. That's all the service.
They got live blessing in that one. So
I don't even remember. I got possessed, didn't I?
Yes, you literally gave them a blessing while possessed.
Okay. Well, was that a Grand Bois blessing?
It was.
Okay, so I got possessed by Grand Bois. Apparently, gave people blessings in the middle of our power. So again, you think that this is how magic works? At least voodoo magic, right? This is how it works, right? If you're a sponsor, you help us keep the roof over our heads. You're helping us make the powders. You get blessings because it's all about the exchange. Like if you're keeping us alive, the spirits will keep you alive or help keep you getting better. So become a sponsor today. That's the upshot, and you can kind of get these kind of random but not so random spiritual experiences that are awesome, because you can come to the workshops, you can come to our work days when we're just here making stuff. So because by your helping us keep the lights on, we want to get back as much as you can, but you got to help us keep the lights on. That's my spiel to become a sponsor. So please, if you haven't already, become a sponsor. And then next week we'll start on the element stuff, of which Zach knows that my elemental Western magic comes from Barden first, and
I used to be that's where I came from originally. Actually,
yeah, both of us came from.
And I take it in shamanic directions, so it's not Barden anymore, and it's not going to be just by the book. You'll get. I mean, I don't have to transmit Earth to you because you're already here on Earth, on rocks. So you'll learn how to connect with that next week, which will be a very different take on the Kabbalah and on how these things work in a more intimate way. So the whole tarot will be an intimate connection to the tarot, not here, read the book and here's the formula.
Absolutely.
That's not what we're going to cover. So, again, I can't stress enough. The only way we can bring you these workshops, the only way we can bring you people like Jason is if you're a sponsor. So I'll leave it at that. Become a sponsor today. Help us keep the lights on, and we'll keep bringing excellence to you. Yeah. That was my spiel.
That's your spiel.
Totally agree. Energy for energy.
And that said, I want to thank Jason for coming on the show. We really appreciate it. We're really looking forward to bringing you back on for that book because I think both me and Zach are.
Yeah, it was a pleasure.
Topics. I think that's a topic we're both very interested in. That particular, that even the book has been mentioned before.
I like the idea where you make the tarot living for people. It's the same with the I Ching, people just toss some coins and read the book. You have to have the. You can't do anything until you have the hexagrams burned into you as a living experience. So it's a good approach.
We should have you on just to talk about that.
We should that because we've had those conversations.
So maybe we'll be kind of we'll have Zach be talking to book the show for that too. That said, everyone, I know it's kind of. At least in a lot of places, there's a lot of sickness going on. A lot of people I know are getting sick now, even though it's sort of not being covered. Try to stay safe. Try to stay well, and try to get as much happiness into your life as you possibly can. This is Deeper Down the Rabbit Hole and the Queen City Curio Videocast. We will see you next week. We don't know who we have next week yet.
We don't know who we have. We had someone booked, and then they rescheduled because of flights. So we'll figure out someone.
You guys are smart. You're fun.
We're what, Jason?
You guys are smart and fun, so I'll tune in next time.
Next time, well, it might just be us.
It might just be us. We'll see.
It might just be us. I mean, we're going to see. We'll see. So everyone, again, stay safe. This is Deep Down the Rabbit Hole.